Indirect statement is one of the three kinds of indirect discourse or reported speech. An indirect statement is related to a direct statement. So what is a direct statement? A direct statement records the exact words that someone says or said. In writing, you will see quotation marks around direct quotations. For example, the boy says, quote, "The slaves are in the kitchen," end quote. An indirect statement may or may not record the exact words, may be a summary of what was said, and does not involve quotation marks. For example, the boy says that people are in the kitchen. So how do we recognize direct and indirect statements in Latin? Direct statements will be surrounded by quotation marks. Also, the verb inquit should only be used with direct statements. Other than inquit, the main verb may be some other verb of saying, asking, telling, thinking, hearing, or sensing. Many teachers call these head verbs because saying, asking, telling, thinking, hearing, or sensing are all now understood to happen with our heads. On the other hand, indirect statements are also introduced by a head verb, but never inquit. After the head verb, there will be the verb in the reported speech. This communicates what action is reported, and its form will be an infinitive. If the head verb is active, Latin must supply the subject of the infinitive, and this subject is in the accusative. This use of the accusative is called the accusative subject of the infinitive in indirect statement. If the head verb is passive, there is no accusative subject of the infinitive, because the subject of the head verb is understood to be the subject of the infinitive. To clarify this sum, let's look at two examples. First, puer dicit servos in cucina esse. The head verb dicit introduces the indirect statement. The verb in the reported speech is the infinitive esse. Because dicit is active, we expect there to be an accusative subject of the infinitive esse, and there is, servos. So let's translate this sentence. We start with the main verb dicit and its subject puer, so the boy says. English signifies indirect speech by following the head verbs with the word that, so the boy says that. In the indirect statement, we have the subject servos, the verb esse, and the prepositional phrase in cucina. So together, the slaves are in the kitchen. Remember to conjugate your translation of the infinitive. Altogether, the translation is, the boy says that the slaves are in the kitchen. And now another example. Servi dicuntur in cucina esse. The head verb dicuntur introduces the indirect statement. The verb in the reported speech is the infinitive esse. Because dicuntur is passive, we do not expect there to be a subject of the infinitive esse, and there is not one. So let's translate the sentence. We start with the main verb dicuntur and its subject servi. So, the slaves are said. Since the head verb is passive, we understand the subject of the indirect statement to be servi, so the slaves are not repeated in the Latin or in our English translation. We simply translate the infinitive esse as an infinitive and supply the prepositional phrase. So altogether, the slaves are said to be in the kitchen. Note that when you translate different tenses of the infinitive, you will have to adjust the tense of the reported speech. The present infinitive happens at the same time as the head verb, the perfect infinitive happens before it, and the future infinitive happens after the head verb. Let's look at the second example with the three different tenses of infinitives. We have already translated servi dicuntur in cucina esse. The slaves are said to be in the kitchen. Note how, with the present infinitive, the slaves are in the kitchen at the same time that someone mentions them. The example above it, with the perfect infinitive, servi dicuntur in cucina fuisse, can be translated as the slaves are said to have been in the kitchen because the perfect infinitive reports action that happened before the head verb. The bottom example, with the future infinitive, servi dicuntur in cucina futuri esse, can be translated as the slaves are said to be about to be in the kitchen, because the future infinitive reports action happening after the main verb. To review, let's look at a third example. Servi sciunt se in cucina laboravisse. How do we recognize that this is an indirect statement? The verb sciunt records thinking and is a head verb. There is also an infinitive laboravisse. Because sciunt is active, we need an accusative subject of laboravisse, and the pronoun se offers itself to fill this role. When the subject of the main verb is also the subject of the infinitive in the indirect statement, the reflexive pronouns will be used as the accusative subject of the infinitive. So how do we translate this sentence? The slaves know that they have worked in the kitchen.